Chapter 1. The Hidden Hunger for Approval. Every human life is quietly defined by two profound and unfolding love stories. The first story is the one we all know, the one we celebrate in our art and sing about in our music. It is the quest for romantic love. We map its every twist and turn, recognizing its power to uplift us and its devastating ability to break us. There is absolutely no shame in admitting that we are looking for a partner or that our hearts have been fractured by one. But the second love story is an entirely different matter. It is a more hidden, more fiercely guarded tale. We rarely speak of it out loud, and when we do, we usually mask it behind clinical, respectable words like ambition, drive, or career trajectory. Yet, this second quest is just as intense, just as complicated, and just as universal as the first. It is the quest for love from the world. When we hear the word love, we usually think of a parent's unconditional embrace or a partner's intimate affection. But what we desperately want from the world is a distinct, vital variation of that exact same energy. We want to be noticed. We want our names to be registered, our opinions to be weighed, and our presence to matter. To be granted high standing in society is to feel the warmth of the world's gaze. It is to walk into a room and feel the space subtly yield to you, to speak and find that people naturally stop to listen, to make a mistake, and be met with understanding rather than immediate, cold dismissal. Those who possess this standing are granted the invisible grace of society. Those without it are quietly, brutally dismissed as nobodies. Of course, the idea of a nobody is a logical absurdity. Every single person on this earth is a living, breathing universe of memories, fears, and hopes. But the term perfectly captures the chilling way society treats those who have not secured its approval. To lack standing is to be rendered practically invisible. Consider a local entrepreneur who decides to completely renovate their business space. They pour their life savings and sleepless nights into the project. They agonize over the layout, carefully selecting an ultra-minimal dark aesthetic, obsessing over the charcoal black trimmings, the premium lighting, the exact placement of every piece of furniture. They exhaust themselves to make it perfect. Why do they do this? If running a business were purely about the physical transaction of goods, 4 bare walls and a simple counter would suffice. But they are not just building a shop, they are building a monument to their own worth. They want to stand behind that counter and see respect in the eyes of the people who walk through the door. They want the community to step into that meticulously crafted space and silently agree, this person matters. They are seeking the world's love, translated into the currency of admiration and dignity. When that worldly love is denied or withdrawn, the pain is agonizing. The punishment of being ignored leaves no physical bruises, but it shatters the spirit. Think of someone you might know, perhaps a younger brother who begins to retreat entirely from the expectations of society. He locks himself in his room, bathed in the blue glow of a monitor, immersing himself in video games for hours, sometimes days on end. The outside world might casually label him as lazy or unmotivated, but look closer, beneath the surface of that judgment. Often, this retreat is not born of apathy, but of overwhelming, paralyzing anxiety. In the real world, the criteria for respect are harsh, shifting, and profoundly unforgiving. The fear of stepping out, trying, and being judged as a nobody is so terrifying that he chooses not to play the game of society at all. In the digital world, the rules are clear, the achievements are guaranteed, and the crushing weight of the real world's judgment cannot reach him. He is protecting himself from the pain of invisibility. Why are we so vulnerable to this? Why should the distracted greeting of a colleague or a perceived lack of success have the power to hollow us out? It happens because we are fundamentally, structurally uncertain about our own value. In an ideal, purely rational world, we would be perfectly impermeable. We would build a solid internal assessment of our worth based on an honest evaluation of our own character. If someone praised us insincerely, we would simply smile, knowing it was untrue. If someone ignored us, we would not be wounded because we would already know our own consequence. But in reality, we are afflicted by a chronic congenital self-doubt. Inside our own minds, we hold wildly divergent views of ourselves. On a good morning, we might feel that we are clever, capable, and worthy of great things. By the afternoon, a single setback can convince us that we are foolish and entirely superfluous. Because we cannot settle this debate ourselves, we outsource the final verdict to the world. Our sense of self is essentially a leaking balloon. To remain inflated, it requires a constant, steady stream of helium in the form of external validation. When someone remembers our name or praises our work, we inflate with a quiet, buoyant joy. We feel we have a right to exist. But when we are overlooked, the helium drains away, leaving us sagging and hollow. We are forced to endure a corroding awareness that we have failed to convince the world of our value, which rapidly translates into a devastating inability to value ourselves. This hidden hunger drives the relentless machinery of our lives. When we see people agonizing over their careers, obsessing over their possessions, or working themselves to the point of exhaustion, we are rarely witnessing simple greed. We are witnessing a poignant, deeply human plea for affection. We are watching people try to gather the tokens that will compel the world to look at them with kindness, to treat their complexities with indulgence, and to grant them the ultimate comfort of feeling that they truly matter. Yet acknowledging this hidden hunger only brings us to the threshold of a deeper mystery. If the desire for standing is a universal human trait, why does it feel so uniquely agonizing right now? Why, in a modern era where we possess levels of comfort and abundance that our ancestors could barely have imagined, are we plagued by such profound feelings of inadequacy and failure? The answer does not lie in what we lack, but rather in a beautiful, dangerous lie we have been told about what we are supposed to achieve. Chapter 2. The Trap of Endless Expectation. If you were to take a person from a few centuries ago and drop them directly into our modern world, they would likely believe they had arrived in a kind of paradise. They would be entirely overwhelmed by the sheer, unimaginable abundance that surrounds us. We live in climate-controlled homes. We have immediate access to a global variety of food at our local markets, and we carry devices in our pockets that can connect us instantly to anyone on the planet. By any historical standard, even the most average life today is drenched in miracles. We are safer, healthier, and richer than almost any generation that has come before us. Logically, this unprecedented accumulation of comfort and technology should have brought an end to human anxiety. We should be waking up every single morning overflowing with a deep, profound gratitude for the ease of our existence. But we do not. Instead, we are stressed, perpetually exhausted, and haunted by a persistent feeling that our lives are somehow insufficient. We look at our overflowing closets and feel we have nothing to wear. We look at our reliable vehicles and feel embarrassed by the year they were manufactured. We sit in comfortable homes and feel a sharp, biting panic that we are falling behind. To understand why this happens, we have to recognize a devastating truth about human psychology. Wealth, success, and satisfaction are never absolute. They are entirely relative. We do not judge our lives by looking at what we actually have in our hands. We judge our lives by comparing what we have to the people around us, and more importantly, to what we have been told we are supposed to have. Think about the precise nature of envy. It is a very specific, deeply targeted emotion. You do not feel envious of a royal monarch living in a palace across the ocean, nor do you feel a pang of jealousy when you hear about a tech billionaire launching a rocket into space. Their lives are so profoundly different, so entirely removed from your daily reality, that you cannot even begin to map your existence onto theirs. They exist in a separate universe. The people who truly keep us awake at night, the ones who have the power to ruin our mood with a single social media update, are our equals. They are the people we went to school with, the colleagues who started at the company the exact same year we did, the friends who grew up in the same neighborhood. Imagine two close friends who have known each other since childhood. They shared the same classrooms, they had similar grades, and they started out with roughly the same opportunities in life. For years, their lives ran on parallel tracks, but then in their 30s, one of them begins to pull ahead. Perhaps they start a small business that suddenly catches fire, or they secure a major promotion that fundamentally changes their income. The next time they meet for dinner, the more successful friend pulls up in a brand new luxury car. They casually mention a recent vacation to an exclusive resort. They do not do this to be cruel. They are simply sharing their life. But sitting across the table, the other friend experiences a quiet, agonizing internal crisis. Their own life, which they were perfectly content with just hours earlier, suddenly feels painfully inadequate. Their reliable car now feels like a symbol of failure. Their upcoming weekend trip feels embarrassing. They force a smile and offer congratulations, but beneath that smile is a dark, twisting sensation in the chest. It is not that they are suddenly lacking the basic necessities of survival. Their actual material reality has not changed by a single atom. What has changed is the gap between their reality and the new benchmark established by their peer. This is the trap of endless expectation. In a society that constantly preaches equality and limitless opportunity, we are conditioned to believe that we can be anything and that we can have everything. The modern world has fundamentally erased the old, rigid boundaries of class and destiny. In the distant past, if you were born to a poor family in a rural village, you knew with absolute certainty that you would die in that same village, doing the exact same work. Your life was fixed. While that existence was undeniably harsh and physically demanding, it offered one distinct psychological protection. You never tortured yourself with the expectation of becoming an aristocrat. The ceiling was made of iron, and because you could not break it, you did not blame yourself for standing beneath it. Today, the iron ceiling has been replaced by an infinite sky. From the moment we are young, we are bombarded with a singular, intoxicating message. If you work hard enough, if you believe in yourself enough, there is no limit to what you can achieve. You can build the empire. You can write the bestseller. You can change the world. It is a beautiful, inspiring philosophy, but it carries a terrifying shadow. If society tells you that you can achieve absolutely anything, and you find yourself living an ordinary, quiet, middle-of-the-road life, what does that make you? It makes you a failure by your own hand. The removal of the ceiling is also the removal of all excuses. When infinite success is presented as a realistic expectation, an ordinary life is suddenly reframed as a tragedy of unfulfilled potential. We are trapped in a mathematical equation of self-worth. Our satisfaction in life is essentially our actual achievements divided by our expectations. If you want to increase your happiness, you have exactly two choices. You can either massively increase your achievements, or you can lower your expectations. The tragedy of the modern world is that it strictly forbids us from lowering our expectations. We are living inside a massive, global engine designed to constantly manufacture desire. Every advertisement we see, every lifestyle blog we read, and every perfectly curated photograph we scroll past is engineered to plant a seed of dissatisfaction in our minds. They are designed to make us look at our perfectly adequate lives and feel a sudden, urgent hunger for more. A new phone is released, and the perfectly functional device in our hand instantly feels obsolete. A new trend emerges, and our perfectly comfortable clothes suddenly feel shameful. We try to solve this anxiety by running faster. We work longer hours. We take on more debt. We push ourselves to the brink of physical and emotional exhaustion to acquire the things we believe will finally make us feel secure. We think that if we can just reach the next rung on the ladder, if we can just cross that next financial threshold, the anxiety will stop. But it never stops. The moment you achieve the thing you spent years dreaming about, the joy is shockingly brief. Within a matter of weeks, the new house, the new title, or the new salary simply becomes the new normal. The baseline adjusts. You look up and you realize the horizon has moved again. The expectations have shifted, and you are right back where you started, feeling the exact same hunger, staring at the exact same gap between who you are and who you feel you are supposed to be. To find peace in this environment requires a radical act of mental rebellion. It requires looking at the endless conveyor belt of modern expectations and consciously deciding not to step onto it. It demands the profound realization that accumulating more will never, ever heal a soul that is bleeding from comparison. We must learn to untangle our self-worth from the impossible standards of the crowd, because if we do not, we will spend our entire lives running a race that has no finish line, exhausted, terrified, and forever chasing a ghost. Chapter 3. The Cruelty of the Ladder. For the vast majority of human history, the story of your life was essentially written the moment you took your first breath. If you were born in a damp, drafting cottage to parents who worked the soil, you would work the soil. If you were born in a sprawling stone estate surrounded by velvet and silver, you would inherit the estate. Your intelligence, your work ethic, and your moral character had absolutely no bearing on your financial destiny. This old world was undeniably rigid, wildly unfair, and suffocating to human potential. Yet, tucked inside this incredibly unjust system was a profound and unexpected psychological mercy. In that older world, Poverty was a physical hardship, but it was not a personal insult. Because the social structure was completely out of anyone's control, the peasant looking up at the aristocrat did not feel a crushing sense of inadequacy. The peasant knew that the aristocrat had not earned his wealth. He had simply been handed it by the blind lottery of birth. More importantly, the peasant knew that his own poverty was not a reflection of his soul or his intellect. He was not poor because he was foolish or lazy. He was poor because the universe had placed him there. In many cultures, the poor were even elevated morally, viewed as the noble, suffering bedrock of society, while the wealthy were often viewed with deep spiritual suspicion. If you failed in the old world, you were called unfortunate. It is a beautiful, revealing word. To be unfortunate simply meant that you were without fortune. You were missing luck. It was not your fault. Then the modern world arrived and we tore down those ancient walls. We built a new, gleaming society based on a breathtakingly beautiful and revolutionary idea, the idea of a fair race. We decided that no one should be bound by the circumstances of their birth. We built a towering ladder of opportunity and declared that everyone, regardless of their background, would be given the chance to climb it. We instituted public education. We celebrated the self-made innovator, and we promised that if you studied hard, worked relentlessly, and applied your talents, you would rise to the top. The rewards of society would no longer be handed out by the blind lottery of birth. They would be handed out strictly according to merit. This shift is undeniably one of the greatest moral achievements in human history. It unleashed a tidal wave of innovation and lifted millions out of generational despair. But like all sweeping revolutions, it brought with it a dark, unintended shadow. When we changed the rules of success, we also fundamentally changed the rules of failure. Think deeply about the psychological trap we have inadvertently constructed. If we truly believe that we live in a perfectly fair society where the smartest and hardest working people invariably reach the top, what are we forced to conclude about the people who end up at the bottom? If the winners truly, absolutely deserve their success, then the terrifying unspoken corollary must also be true. The losers truly, absolutely deserve their failure. Imagine a man who has poured his entire soul into running a small, independent business. Let us say a community bookstore or a local bakery. He is a good man. He arrives at dawn, he treats his employees with profound kindness, and he knows the names of his customers' children. For a decade, he provides a modest, respectable life for his family. Then, the landscape of the world shifts. A massive, heavily funded corporate competitor opens 2 streets away. Supply chain costs suddenly double due to international events completely beyond his control. A new digital trend changes how people consume what he sells. He fights valiantly. He works 16-hour days. He remortgages his home. He does everything humanly possible to save his life's work. But the tide is too strong. The business collapses and he is forced to lock the doors for the final time. How does the modern world view this man? How does he view himself? In the past, he might have been seen as a tragic victim of shifting fates, a man who encountered a storm he could not outrun. But the modern ladder of merit offers no such comfort. The silent, crushing judgment of the modern economy is that he was not innovative enough. He failed to pivot. He lacked the necessary vision. Society looks at his empty storefront and quietly concludes that the market has spoken and it has found him wanting. The most devastating part is not what society thinks of him, it is what he thinks of himself. He absorbs the cruel logic of the ladder. He lies awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and he does not curse the economy or the cruelty of chance. He curses himself. He feels a deep, agonizing, unshakable shame. He looks at his bank account and believes it is a direct, accurate reflection of his value as a human being. He feels like a failure. We have replaced the word unfortunate with the word loser. A loser is not someone who lacked luck. A loser is someone who was given a fair shot at the game of life, stepped onto the field, and was beaten because they simply were not good enough. This is the crushing weight of the modern world. We have entirely erased the concept of luck from our economic vocabulary. When a person becomes a billionaire, we rarely attribute it to a fortunate alignment of timing, geography, and favorable market conditions. We attribute it entirely to their towering genius and relentless grind. And because we give them total credit for their victory, we are forced to give the struggling worker total blame for their defeat. This relentless philosophy ignores the messy, beautiful, chaotic reality of human existence. It ignores the fact that a brilliant mind might be born into a situation where they are forced to care for an ailing parent instead of attending a prestigious university. It ignores the fact that a person with profound artistic talent might not possess the ruthless, competitive edge required to monetize it in a cutthroat market. It ignores the fact that illness, timing, and pure, blind chance still dictate the trajectory of our lives far more than we are comfortable admitting. The ladder of merit is a magnificent economic engine, but it is a terrible, merciless judge of human worth. To survive its cruelty, we must stage a quiet rebellion in our own minds. We must fiercely separate our economic output from our soul's value. We must look at the struggling business owner, the overlooked artist, or the exhausted employee, and recognize that a low balance in a bank account is not a spiritual indictment. And more importantly, we must look in the mirror and offer ourselves the same grace. When you encounter setbacks, when the promotion goes to someone else, or when your grand plans dissolve into dust, you must refuse to let the market determine your dignity. You are not a spreadsheet. You are not a resume. You are a complex, breathing human being operating in a chaotic universe where the best and brightest do not always win, and where failure is often just a brutal intersection of time and chance. Realizing this does not make you a victim. It makes you free. It frees you from the paralyzing shame of the ladder, allowing you to walk through the world not as a competitor desperately trying to justify your existence, but as a complete human being whose worth was never up for negotiation in the first place. Chapter 4. The Fragility of Our Standing. Have you ever walked into a crowded room, struck up a conversation with a perfect stranger, and felt a strange, invisible timer ticking down? You are exchanging pleasantries, laughing, and perhaps finding genuine common ground, but you know with absolute certainty that an inevitable question is coming. It is the question that defines almost all modern social interaction, the toll gate through which you must pass to determine the course of the relationship. Eventually, the stranger will smile, tilt their head, and ask, "So, what do you do?" When you answer, you are not merely providing a job title. You are handing over the raw data that the other person will use to calculate your precise value as a human being. If your answer suggests wealth, influence, or high standing, watch how their posture changes. They lean in closer, their eyes widen with genuine interest, they laugh a little harder at your jokes. But what happens if your answer suggests an ordinary, quiet, or struggling life? We have all experienced what happens next. It is one of the most chilling, isolating experiences in modern society. The stranger's smile remains fixed, but their eyes physically detach from yours. Their gaze begins to drift over your shoulder, scanning the room for someone more important, someone who can offer them a better return on their social investment. They politely excuse themselves, and you are left standing alone with your drink, feeling the distinct, stinging burn of having been weighed, measured, and discarded. We call these people snobs. When we hear the word snob, we usually picture someone entirely obsessed with luxury, someone who insists on the finest wines, the most exclusive clubs, or the correct pronunciation of foreign words. But true snobbery has very little to do with an appreciation for fine things. Snobbery is a profound psychological condition. A snob is simply a person whose affection for you is strictly tied to your social rank. The tragedy of the snob is their complete lack of imagination. When they look at a human being, they cannot see the sprawling complexity of a soul. They cannot see your quiet acts of kindness, your loyalty to your friends, or the private battles you have fought and won. They take one tiny, surface-level fraction of your identity, your job title, or your postal code, and they use it to come to a total, final, unyielding verdict on your entire worth. We hate snobs, and we rightly complain about them, but we are also deeply terrified of them. Their rejection hurts because we live in a world heavily populated by them, and we know that we are entirely dependent on their good graces. If our status in society were something solid, something we could hold in our hands and protect, the snob's gaze would not matter. But our standing is not solid at all. It is incredibly, terrifyingly fragile. We like to believe that we are the masters of our own destiny. We are told that if we build our careers carefully and act responsibly, our position in the world will be secure. Yet a quiet, honest look at our lives reveals that our status rests on a precarious, trembling foundation of dependencies. First, we depend on our own talents, but human talent is notoriously unreliable. It is not a machine that can be switched on at will. A writer might wake up one morning to find that their inspiration has vanished. A brilliant strategist might suddenly find that their instincts no longer align with a shifting market. We cannot command our own genius to appear, which means we cannot guarantee the output that secures our standing. More significantly, we depend on forces entirely outside the walls of our own minds. We depend on the whims of our employers and the ruthless shifting tides of the global economy. Consider a dedicated, highly skilled worker who has given a decade of their life to a respectable company. They know the internal systems better than anyone. They stay late to mentor the junior staff. They tie their identity, their pride, and their family's security to this organization. They do everything perfectly right. But one afternoon, in a boardroom thousands of miles away, an abstract decision is made. The market has shifted, materials have become more expensive, and the shareholders are demanding a higher return. To balance a spreadsheet, a whole division must be cut. The worker is called into a brief, sterile meeting and handed a cardboard box to pack up their desk. Their livelihood is severed in an instant. This devastation does not occur because the worker is flawed. It does not happen because they were lazy or unintelligent or lacking in character. It happens because they are a small, fragile cog in a massive, indifferent machine. They were entirely dependent on the profitability of an entity that felt no loyalty to them in return. When that worker walks out of the building with their box, they do not just lose a paycheck, they lose their standing. The next time they go to a dinner party and the snob asks, "What do you do?" they will have to swallow their pride and say, "I am currently looking for opportunities." And they will have to endure the agonizing experience of watching the snob's eyes drift away. This profound lack of control is the beating heart of our status anxiety. We are trying to build a stable, peaceful identity on a piece of land that is constantly prone to earthquakes. We are desperately trying to secure the love of the world, knowing full well that this love is conditional, and knowing that our ability to meet those conditions could be stripped away from us at any moment by a stroke of bad luck, an economic downturn, or a sudden change in public taste. If we live our entire lives under these conditions, chasing the approval of snobs and relying on the fickle stability of the market, we will never know a single day of true peace. We will always be looking over our shoulder. We will always be waiting for the floor to drop out from beneath us. To survive this terrifying fragility, we cannot simply try to become more successful. Success does not cure dependence, it only raises the stakes. Instead, we must fundamentally change the way we process the judgments of the world. We need to build an internal fortress, a mechanism that allows us to stand in front of the snob, listen to their dismissal, and remain entirely unharmed. We must learn how to protect our minds. Chapter 5. The Shield of the Mind. If we spend our lives endlessly vulnerable to the shifting opinions of the crowd, terrified of the snob's dismissal and paralyzed by the cruel ladder of the modern world, we will inevitably be crushed. We cannot simply resign ourselves to living with this open, bleeding wound of anxiety. We must find a way to defend ourselves. We must construct a shield. This shield is not made of arrogance, nor is it formed by withdrawing from society and hiding in isolation. It is constructed through the deliberate, disciplined cultivation of an intellectual conscience. The fundamental flaw in how we process the world's judgment is that we treat every external opinion as a sacred, indisputable truth. When society hands down a verdict on our lives, we act as a completely defenseless organism. If a stranger suggests we are foolish, we immediately believe we are foolish. If a colleague implies we are failing, we absorb the failure into our bones. We bypass our own internal judgment entirely, allowing the raw, unfiltered opinions of the world to pass directly into our bloodstream and dictate our self-worth. To understand how dangerous this is, let us visualize a person who decides to pour their soul into a massive public endeavor. Imagine a creator who commits to a grueling creative marathon, perhaps writing and recording a new, deeply thoughtful piece of audio content every single day for 100 consecutive days. It is an act of sheer vulnerability and immense discipline. They invest countless hours into the cadence of their voice, the depth of their message, and the quiet late-night hours of production. For the first month, the response from the world is warm. But on the 45th day, a stranger stumbles across their work and leaves a vicious, mocking comment. The comment is entirely baseless, written by someone who listened to perhaps 10 seconds of the audio before deciding to unleash their own unresolved anger on the creator. Without a shield, what does the creator do? They read the words on the screen, and their internal balloon completely deflates. They forget the 44 days of profound, meaningful work. They forget the discipline they have cultivated. They lie awake in the dark, agonizing over the flippant words of a faceless stranger, convinced that the project is a humiliating failure and that they ought to just give up. Now, let us introduce the mechanism of defense. Think of your mind as a fortress, and imagine placing a calm, highly rational sentry at the main gate. This sentry is your intellectual conscience. When an insult, a dismissal, or a negative judgment is fired at you from the outside world, it is no longer allowed to pierce your skin immediately. It is not granted automatic entry. Instead, it must first land in a sorting box at the gate. Inside this sorting box, the rational sentry examines the criticism and asks a series of highly logical questions. Is this judgment fundamentally true? Was it delivered by someone who possesses all the relevant facts? Does the person launching this critique have a mind, a character, or a moral compass that I genuinely respect? Let us apply this sentry to the creator who received the vicious comment. The criticism lands in the sorting box. The creator steps back and examines it objectively. They ask, does this critic know my intentions? No. Has this critic endured the discipline of a 100-day creative marathon? Unlikely. Is this comment a thoughtful analysis of the work, or is it merely the impulsive reflex of an unhappy person? Once the creator runs the comment through the filter of reason, a profound realization occurs. The criticism is not a reflection of the creator's failure. It is entirely a reflection of the critic's own internal misery. Because the judgment is demonstrably false and deeply flawed, the sentry denies it entry. The insult is returned to the sender. It is rendered completely harmless. It might be loud, it might be rude, but it carries absolutely no psychological weight. The creator wakes up on the 46th day, steps up to the microphone, and continues their work with their dignity entirely intact. This mental shield requires us to take a profoundly honest, entirely unromantic look at the crowd we are so desperate to please. We spend our lives terrified of public opinion. We bend over backwards to conform to the expectations of society. But what exactly is society? If you were to sit down and deeply analyze the minds of the people whose approval you crave, you would likely be horrified. Imagine someone who has poured their heart into building a respected local business. They have designed a beautiful, welcoming space, working tirelessly to serve their community. One afternoon, they hear a piece of bitter gossip circulating in the neighborhood about their choices or their character. A sudden, terrifying wave of anxiety washes over them. A part of them wants to panic, to change their entire approach, or to confront the gossipers in a desperate bid to win back their favor. But if they activate the shield of the mind, they stop and examine the source of the noise. They look closely at the people spreading the rumor. Often they will realize that these individuals are notoriously unhappy, endlessly cynical people who are prone to envy and who have never built anything of lasting value in their own lives. When you realize the profound flaws of the jury, the verdict loses its power to terrify you. Why on earth would a builder tear down their own monument just because someone who has only ever thrown stones told them to? Why should we allow our peace of mind to be destroyed by the opinions of people we would never actually go to for advice? This is the true, liberating power of an intellectual conscience. It is not about becoming cold, arrogant, or utterly detached from human connection. It is about refusing to let your self-worth be determined by a democratic vote among people who are barely paying attention. It is the realization that the world is entirely capable of being wrong. When you build this shield, you reclaim ownership of your own identity. You realize that just because someone misunderstands you does not mean you are fundamentally flawed. You can walk into the crowded room, face the snob who looks away from you when they discover your modest job title, and listen to their silent dismissal with absolute peace. You do not need to feel inferior, because your rational mind has already examined their snobbery in the sorting box and recognized it for what it is. A foolish, narrow way of looking at a complex human being. You become the final arbiter of your own worth. But even with the strongest philosophical shield, the human mind can sometimes grow weary. Constantly defending oneself against the harsh judgments of the world is exhausting work. Sometimes, to truly remember our value, we need more than just logical defense. We need to look away from the ruthless, transactional crowd altogether and seek out a completely different kind of mirror, one that reflects our hidden nobilities, our quiet struggles, and our profound shared humanity. Chapter 6. The Empathy of the Canvas Building. A logical fortress in your mind is a magnificent defense against the cruel judgments of the world, but it is also deeply exhausting. You cannot spend every hour of your life standing guard at the gates of your own consciousness, endlessly interrogating every piece of criticism and rationally dismissing every snob you encounter. Logic is a cold, hard weapon, and while it protects us, it does not necessarily comfort us. There are moments when the sheer weight of feeling overlooked or undervalued bypasses our reason entirely. In those moments, we do not need a philosophical argument to prove that our lives matter. We need a mirror that reflects our true worth back to us in a language that our hearts can immediately understand. This is the profound, hidden purpose of art. In the modern world, we often misunderstand what art actually is. We treat it as a luxury commodity, a decorative hobby for the wealthy, or a subject to be memorized for a history exam. But at its core, true art is none of these things. It is a silent, breathtaking rebellion against the value system of society. Society looks at the world through a very specific, ruthless lens. It trains a massive spotlight on the powerful, the wealthy, and the victorious. It tells us that these are the only lives worthy of our attention and our record. Art takes that massive spotlight, deliberately drags it away from the palace and the boardroom, and shines it directly onto the shadows. It forces us to look at the people, the moments, and the struggles that society normally walks right past. Imagine walking through the hushed halls of a great museum. You pass by massive, glittering portraits of ancient kings sitting on horses and wealthy merchants displaying their jewels. These are the people society deemed important. But then you turn a corner and you stop in front of a smaller, quieter canvas. The painter has not chosen to capture a victorious battle or a royal wedding. Instead, they have painted a tired woman standing in a dim, stone kitchen, slowly peeling vegetables into a chipped wooden bowl. Or perhaps they have simply painted a loaf of bread sitting on a scarred wooden table, illuminated by a single shaft of late afternoon sunlight. Why would a masterful artist, someone capable of painting anything in the world, spend months agonizing over the exact shade of light hitting a peeling onion or the exhausted slope of a quiet woman's shoulders? They do it to forcefully recalibrate our vision. By placing an ordinary, unglamorous moment inside a heavy gold frame and hanging it on the wall of a museum, the artist is making a radical statement. They are demanding that we stop and pay reverence to the mundane. They are telling us that there is profound dignity, beauty, and grace in the quiet, uncelebrated corners of human existence. When you stand before that canvas, a profound psychological healing takes place. If society has made you feel like a failure because your life is ordinary, the painting reaches out and completely validates your existence. It whispers that you do not need to command armies or build empires for your life to possess profound beauty. Your quiet morning routine, your uncelebrated labor, your gentle care for your family, these are not the marks of a nobody. In the eyes of the artist, they are the very essence of human nobility. This deep, subversive empathy is not limited to paint and canvas. It is the lifeblood of great storytelling. Consider the experience of reading a magnificent sweeping novel. If the author were to adopt the judgmental lens of the modern world, they would only write stories about billionaires and conquerors. But the greatest storytellers invariably choose to write about the forgotten. Think of a novel that follows the life of a quiet, unremarkable person living in a small provincial town. To the passing world, this person is entirely unimportant. Just another face in the crowd, a shop clerk, or a minor administrative worker. Society would summarize their entire existence in a single dismissive sentence. But the novelist takes us inside their mind. For hundreds of pages, we map the sprawling, infinite architecture of their soul. We feel the crushing weight of their private heartbreaks, the fierce intensity of their unspoken dreams, and the quiet heroism of their daily moral choices. By the time you reach the final page, you are completely overwhelmed by the breathtaking complexity of this so-called ordinary person. The novel proves that the external labels society pastes on our foreheads are laughably inadequate. It demonstrates that every single human being walking down the street, regardless of their income or their job title, is carrying a universe inside them. When you internalize this truth, you can never look at a stranger with snobbery again, and more importantly, you can never look at yourself with contempt. But perhaps the most powerful medicine art offers us is its revolutionary treatment of failure. In the real world, failure is treated as a spectacular blood sport. When a prominent figure makes a mistake, loses their fortune, or ruins their reputation, society behaves with terrifying cruelty. The tabloids and the gossip networks feast on their ruin. We tear them down, mock their missteps, and use their public disgrace as a way to feel smugly superior about our own lives. We look at the fallen and say, "I would never be so foolish." Art approaches human ruin in an entirely different way, specifically through the ancient tradition of tragedy. When a playwright constructs a tragic play, they do not present the fallen hero as a monster or a laughingstock. They take us behind the scenes and show us the terrifying, delicate mechanics of the disaster. They show us how a genuinely good person, driven by understandable desires or pressured by impossible circumstances, makes a single fatal misjudgment. They show us the blind spots that any of us could possess and the bad luck that any of us could encounter. When you sit in a dark theater and watch the tragic hero's life unravel, you do not feel smug superiority. You feel a profound, chilling sense of recognition. You realize how incredibly fragile the line is between success and ruin. You weep for the hero because you suddenly understand that under slightly different circumstances, their spectacular failure could easily be your own. This is the ultimate gift of tragic art. It strips away our arrogant illusion of control and replaces it with deep, trembling compassion. It teaches us that failure is not a sign of fundamental wickedness or stupidity. It is an inherent risk of being alive. When we immerse ourselves in the empathy of the canvas, the novel, and the stage, we slowly unlearn the toxic judgments of the world. We stop measuring ourselves by the cold, metallic yardstick of status, and we begin to measure ourselves by the rich, forgiving standard of our shared humanity. Art offers us a sanctuary where our ordinary lives are celebrated, our inner depths are honored, and our inevitable failures are met with tears of understanding rather than the sneers of the crowd. Yet, there is another emotion, entirely different from sorrow or quiet reverence, that holds equal power to shatter the illusions of status. Sometimes, the most effective way to defeat the terrifying weight of the world's expectations is not to weep at them, but to look them right in the eye and strip them of their power through the brilliant, piercing weapon of humor. Chapter 7. The Relief of Laughter. From the moment we wake up in the morning and step out of our front doors, we are engaged in a massive, exhausting performance. We put on clothes that signal our competence. We adopt a tone of voice that implies we are entirely in control of our lives. We sit in meetings, nod thoughtfully, and use complicated jargon to prove that we belong exactly where we are. We project an aura of confidence, pretending that we are not deeply terrified of going broke, making a fool of ourselves, or being exposed as imposters. Maintaining this heavy, polished armor of status is a grueling physical and psychological effort. We carry the tension of it in our shoulders and in our jaws all day long, terrified that if we drop the mask for even a second, the world will see how small and frightened we actually feel. Then, something miraculous happens. We witness something entirely absurd, or we hear a perfectly crafted joke, and we experience an involuntary physical spasm. We laugh. Laughter is one of the most profound and misunderstood human behaviors. We often treat it merely as a sign of mild amusement, a polite reaction to a clever string of words. But in the context of our deep, hidden anxieties about who we are and where we stand in the world, laughter is something much more powerful. It is a psychological pressure release valve. It is the sudden, explosive release of the unbearable tension we carry from trying to be perfect in an unforgiving society. Think about the experience of sitting in a dark, crowded comedy club. A single person stands on a stage under a bright spotlight. If they were to give a serious lecture about the terrifying nature of the modern economy, or the deep, gnawing envy they feel toward their more successful friends, the room would become suffocatingly tense. The audience would cross their arms and look away, deeply uncomfortable with the raw exposure of these shameful emotions. But the comedian does not give a lecture. Instead, they frame these terrifying truths inside a joke. They openly confess to their own pathetic jealousies, their embarrassing financial panics, and their desperate, failed attempts to look sophisticated in front of people who intimidate them. They describe the exact, agonizing thoughts we all harbor in the darkest hours of the night but would never dare say out loud. When the punchline lands, the room erupts. But listen closely to the nature of that laughter. It is not just the sound of people being entertained. It is a collective, roaring sigh of profound relief. Every burst of laughter is the audience subconsciously shouting, "Oh, thank God, it is not just me!" By dragging our most shameful, isolating anxieties out of the dark and placing them under the bright light of humor, the comedian neutralizes their toxic power. We realize that our secret fears of inadequacy are not unique character flaws. They are a completely normal, shared condition of being human. For the duration of the show, the agonizing, solitary burden of status anxiety is lifted, replaced by a warm, forgiving camaraderie of shared imperfection. Humor does not just comfort us by revealing our shared struggles. It also serves as a magnificent, silent weapon against the crushing intimidation of authority and power. Imagine a workplace completely dominated by an incredibly intimidating, highly successful executive. This person is the living embodiment of the status ladder. They wear immaculate, fiercely expensive suits. They speak with sharp, flawless precision. They never seem to sweat. They never seem to hesitate. And they make everyone around them feel small, clumsy, and perpetually inadequate. When they walk down the hallway, people physically shrink against the walls. They project an illusion of godlike perfection, and their very existence makes you feel like a failure. Now, imagine that during a highly tense, terribly important video conference, this terrifying executive attempts to share their screen to display a crucial financial chart. But instead of the chart, they accidentally broadcast a wildly embarrassing, chaotic search history, or perhaps they cannot figure out how to mute a wildly inappropriate song playing in the background. For 2 agonizing minutes, the flawless facade shatters. They panic. Their face turns red. They make confused, helpless noises, mashing buttons on their keyboard like a frustrated child. In that glorious, chaotic moment, the illusion is completely destroyed. You do not laugh out of pure malice. You laugh out of a sudden, breathtaking revelation of reality. You realize that beneath the expensive suit and the terrifying title, this person is just a fragile, easily confused human being, entirely capable of the same ridiculous blunders as anyone else. This is what humor does to power. It refuses to take the symbols of status seriously. It looks at the pompous, puffed-up chest of society and gently, brilliantly deflates it with a pinprick of truth. This mechanism is why satire is such a vital tool for human survival. When we look at the deeply unfair nature of the modern world, the ridiculous ways in which wealth is distributed, or the shallow reasons society decides to elevate one person and ignore another, we often feel a burning sense of injustice. But if we stand in the street and simply scream about how unfair it all is, the world will quickly dismiss us. The defenders of the ladder will call us bitter, resentful, and jealous. They will say we are complaining only because we failed to climb it ourselves. Satire provides a brilliant way to bypass this defense. A great satirist does not complain. They exaggerate. They take the flawed logic of the status game and stretch it to its absolute most ridiculous extreme. They draw caricatures of the wealthy obsessing over meaningless trinkets. They write stories that highlight the breathtaking absurdity of tying human worth to the logo on a piece of clothing or the model of a car. By making the system look completely ridiculous, satire strips society of its intimidating authority. You cannot be terrified of something you are actively laughing at. The laughter builds a wall between your soul and the judgments of the world. It allows you to look at the endless, exhausting rat race and say, I see exactly what this is. It is a silly, arbitrary game, and I refuse to let it determine my value. Through self-deprecating comedy, we learn to forgive ourselves for our own failures. Through satire and mockery, we learn to stop worshipping the successful. Humor levels the playing field. It reminds us that no matter how many titles we acquire or how much wealth we hoard, we are all ultimately the same, slightly confused, highly vulnerable creatures simply doing our best to navigate a chaotic universe without tripping over our own feet. Yet as incredibly powerful as laughter is, its relief is ultimately temporary. When the comedy show ends and we step back out into the cold night air, the laughter fades. The real world, with all its bills, snobs, and relentless expectations, is still waiting for us. To secure a permanent, lasting peace, we must move beyond merely laughing at the rules of society. We must recognize that the rules themselves are not real. We must understand the profound, liberating truth about how these systems of value are constructed and how surprisingly quickly they can vanish into dust. Chapter 8. The Illusion of Permanence. We walk through our modern lives with a deeply ingrained, almost entirely unconscious assumption. We tend to believe that the rules of success, the criteria by which society decides who matters and who does not, are as fixed and unchangeable as the laws of physics. We assume that the qualities we celebrate today, such as relentless entrepreneurial hustle, the accumulation of vast financial wealth, and a hyper-visible public profile, are universally and eternally good. We treat the current definition of a successful human being not as a temporary cultural fashion, but as a permanent absolute truth woven into the very fabric of the universe. Because we believe these rules are permanent and natural, we use them as the ultimate judge of our own souls. If we fail to acquire the things our specific society currently values, we do not merely think we are out of step with the times, we think we are fundamentally broken. But if you were to take a profound, sweeping look at human history, this illusion of permanence shatters completely. The rules of status are not laws of nature. They are entirely man-made, highly fragile, and constantly shifting. Every single society that has ever existed has created its own unique, highly specific definition of what makes a person valuable, and these definitions contradict each other wildly. To truly understand how arbitrary your own society's judgment is, try a mental experiment. Imagine taking the ultimate hero of the modern world, perhaps a phenomenally wealthy, aggressively ambitious corporate executive who works 90-hour weeks, ruthlessly crushes their competition, and owns a fleet of luxury vehicles. In our current era, this person is practically worshipped. They are invited to give keynote speeches, their face is plastered on the covers of magazines, and their lifestyle is held up as the ultimate pinnacle of human achievement. Now, imagine plucking that exact same individual from their high-rise office and dropping them perfectly intact into a deeply spiritual, ascetic community from several centuries ago. How would they be received? They would not be handed a microphone or asked for their advice on how to live. They would be looked upon with profound pity and deep moral disgust. In a society that values silent contemplation, the shedding of worldly desires, and the cultivation of profound inner peace, our modern hero would be viewed as a tragic, spiritually diseased creature. Their obsession with gathering gold and outperforming their neighbors would be seen as a glaring symptom of a sick and restless soul. In that era, they would be at the very bottom of the status ladder. Conversely, imagine taking the most revered figure from that ancient spiritual world, a person who owns absolutely nothing, speaks only when necessary, and spends their days in quiet devotion to the unseen world, and dropping them into the middle of a frantic modern corporate networking event. The modern crowd would look right past them. They would be dismissed as lazy, unmotivated, and entirely useless to the machinery of the economy. They would be a nobody. What does this thought experiment prove? It proves a truth so liberating that it has the power to completely cure our anxieties. Your status in the world is not an objective measure of your intrinsic value as a human being. It is simply a measure of how closely your particular personality happens to align with the temporary, arbitrary needs of the specific economic system you happen to be born into. If you are a deeply sensitive, quietly creative person who struggles to thrive in a cutthroat, profit-driven modern market, you are not a failure. You simply have the misfortune of living in an era that does not currently highly value your specific gifts. In a different century, or under a different system, you might have been the one celebrated, and the aggressive corporate executive might have been the outcast. Why is this so difficult to see when we are inside the system? Why does the current game feel so absolute? It happens because every society produces a powerful, invisible force called ideology. Ideology is the water we swim in. It is the dominant set of beliefs that shapes everything from the advertisements we see to the way our schools are structured. And the defining characteristic of an ideology is that it never presents itself as a choice. It presents itself as simple, indisputable common sense. The people who currently sit at the top of the modern ladder have a vested interest in maintaining the illusion that the ladder is natural. When a society is built around the ferocious accumulation of capital, the entire culture works overtime to convince you that buying things, upgrading your lifestyle, and sacrificing your time for a higher salary is simply what human beings are biologically meant to do. The system needs you to feel a little bit inadequate all the time, because your anxiety is the fuel that keeps the economic engine running. If you suddenly decided that a quiet life, a modest home, and a peaceful mind were enough, the entire machinery of endless consumption would grind to a halt. Therefore, society tells you a terrifying lie. It tells you that if you step off the treadmill, you are giving up. It tells you that if you do not want to conquer the world, you are somehow less than human. But once you recognize that the rules of the game were written by human beings, you realize something profoundly powerful. Human beings can also rewrite them. This is the true, deepest meaning of politics. Politics is not just about elections or government policies. It is the ongoing collective argument about what a society should value. It is the refusal to accept the current definition of success as a permanent law. You do not have to wait for a global revolution to change the rules of your own life. You can stage a quiet, magnificent rebellion right inside your own mind. You can examine the ideals that have been handed to you by your culture, hold them up to the light of your own conscience, and simply decide that you do not agree with them. You can decide that the person who successfully maintains a deeply loving home and raises kind children is infinitely more successful than the person who neglects their family to build a corporate empire. You can decide that the quiet artist who faithfully pursues their craft with zero financial reward is a greater hero than the billionaire who manipulates the market. By defining your own ideals, you strip the modern world of its power to judge you. You step out of the frantic, exhausting race for societal approval, and you begin to walk a path of your own making. You stop trying to prove your worth to a temporary, highly flawed system, and you start living a life that actually makes sense to your own soul. Yet, even when we realize the temporary nature of human societies, we are still prone to moments of panic. The immediate pressures of the day can still overwhelm our philosophy. To secure the ultimate, unshakable perspective, we must look beyond the shifting tides of human history entirely. We must zoom out as far as the mind can travel and confront the most profound, terrifying, and ultimately comforting equalizer of all. Chapter 9. The Perspective of the Stars. Even when we successfully build a fortress in our minds, and even when we recognize that the rules of the modern ladder are entirely arbitrary, the noise of society can still be overwhelmingly loud. We are surrounded by a frantic, buzzing culture that constantly demands our attention and insists upon its own supreme importance. To maintain our peace, it is often not enough to merely argue with the crowd. Sometimes we must step entirely outside the human theater and view our lives through a lens so vast, so incredibly infinite, that the petty anxieties of our daily existence are instantly crushed into dust. We find this profound, liberating perspective in the ultimate equalizer of human experience, the unavoidable reality of our own mortality. In our day-to-day lives, we operate under a desperate illusion of immortality. We obsess over 5-year career plans, we agonize over the accumulation of retirement wealth, and we sacrifice our present happiness to secure a higher social standing for some distant, abstract future. We treat our time as an infinite resource, and because we think we have forever, we allow the judgments of snobs and the pursuit of status symbols to dictate our daily moods. But imagine a person who has spent their entire adult life mastering the game of modern success. They are fiercely intelligent and deeply respected. Their calendar is booked months in advance with crucial meetings, exclusive dinners, and vital negotiations. They have sacrificed their weekends, neglected their closest relationships, and compromised their own quiet passions, all to maintain their position at the very top of the hierarchy. They believe with absolute certainty that their wealth, their title, and their reputation are the most important things in the universe. Then, on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday afternoon, they sit in a sterile, brilliantly lit doctor's office and receive a devastating terminal diagnosis. In the span of a single sentence, The timeline of their life is violently condensed. They are told they have only a few months left. Watch what happens to the architecture of their mind in that terrifying, clarifying moment. The heavy, elaborate armor of their status instantly dissolves. As they walk out of the clinic and into the busy street, the world they dedicated their life to conquering suddenly looks entirely absurd. The urgent emails on their phone feel like the babbling of children. The thought of impressing the wealthy socialite at the upcoming gala is no longer important. It is genuinely laughable. The fierce desire to own a slightly larger home or drive a more expensive car evaporates completely. When you are forced to look at the absolute end of your life, the profound difference between the love of the world and true love becomes devastatingly clear. The world's love, the applause, the VIP invitations, the respectful nods of colleagues, cannot sit by your bed in the dark. It cannot hold your hand when you are terrified. The people who were attracted merely to your status will scatter the moment that status fades. The only thing that retains any value whatsoever in the shadow of the end is genuine, unconditional human connection and the quiet, authentic experiences of the soul. Contemplating our own death is not meant to be a morbid or depressing exercise. It is meant to be a fierce, urgent medicine. When we willingly bring the reality of our mortality to the forefront of our minds, it acts as a magnificent filter. It violently strips away the trivial, exhausting demands of society and leaves only what is truly essential. It gives us the courage to look at the exhausting rat race and say, I simply do not have the time to care about what a stranger thinks of my clothes or my job title. But the perspective of mortality extends far beyond our individual lives. To truly silence the anxieties of status, we must look at the mortality of human power itself. Consider the profound, silencing experience of traveling to a barren desert and standing before the shattered ruins of a forgotten empire. Imagine walking among massive stone columns that have cracked and fallen into the sand and gazing up at the eroded, featureless faces of giant statues. Thousands of years ago, the kings who built these monuments were the undisputed masters of the earth. They possessed wealth that would dwarf the billionaires of our era. They obsessed over their status, they crushed their rivals to climb the ancient ladder, and they ordered thousands of workers to carve their names into stone so that the world would tremble at their memory forever. Now, the wind howls through their empty, shattered palaces. Tourists casually walk over the rubble of their thrones. Their mighty names are entirely forgotten or reduced to a footnote in a dusty textbook. The immense, terrifying power they wielded, power that kept their subjects awake at night with anxiety, amounted to absolutely nothing against the relentless, grinding march of time. Standing in the ruins, we are struck by a beautiful, comforting realization. Every single thing that our current society treats with such deadly seriousness, the stock market fluctuations, the corporate hierarchies, the prestigious awards, and the exclusive neighborhoods will eventually suffer the exact same fate. In a few hundred years, all of it will be gone. The towering glass skyscrapers will crumble, the digital records will vanish, and the fierce, bitter competitions we engaged in will be entirely forgotten. If the greatest empires in human history have all turned to dust, how incredibly arrogant and how incredibly foolish is it to let our peace of mind be destroyed by a missed promotion or a rejected invitation? This comforting insignificance reaches its absolute peak when we look up. Drive out into the wilderness, far from the blinding lights of the city, and stand under a perfectly clear night sky. When you tilt your head back and look at the sprawling, infinite ocean of stars, you are not merely looking at beautiful lights. You are looking at incomprehensible vastness. You are looking at galaxies that are millions of light years away, burning in a universe that has existed for billions of years before you arrived and will continue for billions of years after you are gone. Against the backdrop of the cosmos, the entire planet Earth is nothing more than a microscopic speck of dust suspended in a sunbeam, and upon that speck of dust, human history is just a brief, chaotic flash. When you allow yourself to truly feel the staggering scale of the universe, a profound physical release washes over you. The pressure of the modern world relies entirely on the illusion that your life is a high-stakes, deeply important drama. But the stars offer a magnificent, silent reassurance. They whisper that you are incredibly small, and because you are incredibly small, your mistakes do not matter. Your failure to impress a snob does not matter. Your inability to afford a luxury car does not matter. The universe does not care about your bank account, your job title, or your social standing. This is the ultimate soaring freedom. When we embrace our profound insignificance, we are suddenly liberated from the crushing weight of the world's expectations. We realize that we are just temporary, breathing creatures, granted a tiny sliver of time to experience the miracle of existence. If none of our worldly achievements will last, and if the entire theater of human society is just a temporary game, then we are finally free to put down the heavy burden of status. We are free to stop climbing the ladder, and we are free to step off the stage. All that remains is to decide exactly how we want to spend our brief, beautiful moment in the light. Chapter 10. The Courage to Walk Away. We have built a logical fortress in our minds. We have sought the quiet empathy of art. We have laughed at the absurdity of power, and we have humbled ourselves before the vast silencing scale of the stars. We now understand that the rules of society are entirely man-made, deeply flawed, and painfully temporary. But a deeply practical problem remains. When the sun comes up tomorrow morning and we finish our coffee and step out the front door, we still have to physically exist in a world that operates on the old, ruthless rules of status. How do we actually live in a society obsessed with wealth, titles, and public approval once we have realized that the entire game is a hollow illusion? We are faced with a definitive choice. We can either stay on the treadmill, secretly knowing it is pointless but continuing to run anyway out of the lingering fear of looking foolish, or we can find the profound, life-altering courage to walk away. Walking away does not necessarily mean selling all your possessions, abandoning your responsibilities, and moving to an isolated cabin in the wilderness. True departure is not about geography. It is a profound psychological shift. It is the conscious, deliberate decision to stop treating the dominant culture's definition of success as the only valid way to live a human life. Throughout history, there have always been quiet communities of people who have made this radical choice. Society often dismisses them with slightly condescending labels, calling them eccentric, unambitious, or bohemian dreamers. They are the artists living in cramped apartments, the thinkers who prefer long walks to networking events, and the gentle souls who have looked at the terrifying, exhausting demands of the corporate ladder and simply said, "No, thank you." They are not failures who tried to win the game and lost. They are rebels who recognized that the prize was completely worthless, and so they refused to play. Picture a person who was once on the absolute fast track to modern success. For years they had the grueling mortgage on the massive house, the stress-induced insomnia, and the expensive clothes they bought exclusively to impress colleagues they secretly disliked. They were universally respected, and yet they were suffocating. One day, sitting in traffic or staring at a glowing screen late at night, they calculate the true, devastating cost of their life. They realize they are trading their finite, irreplaceable hours on this earth for the temporary, fickle applause of strangers. So, they make a radical, terrifying choice. They intentionally step off the path. They downsize their life entirely. They move to a smaller, quieter neighborhood. They take a new job that pays a fraction of their old salary, but crucially, this new job ends precisely at 5 o'clock. To the outside world, this looks like a catastrophic failure of ambition. Former friends in high-rise offices gossip about their sudden downfall. The snobs write them off entirely, erasing their number from their phones. But if you were to step inside this person's new, modest home, you would not find tragedy. You would find an overwhelming, breathtaking peace. The heavy, suffocating tension that used to live in their shoulders is completely gone. They spend their evenings reading deeply, cooking slowly, or simply walking with their family without feeling the frantic, neurotic urge to check a screen every 3 minutes. They have traded their prestige for peace. They are no longer a highly important person in the eyes of the world, but they are finally, completely, the author of their own existence. To achieve this kind of freedom, however, you must recognize one crucial vulnerability. We are deeply social creatures. We absorb the values of the people around us like sponges. If you find the courage to step off the ladder, but you continue to surround yourself with people who are frantically obsessed with climbing it, you will eventually drown in self-doubt. If you spend all your time with people who evaluate human worth based on the brand of a car or the exclusivity of a vacation, their anxiety will eventually infect you. You will start to feel poor, not because you lack what you need, but because you lack what they worship. Therefore, the courage to walk away must be accompanied by the effort to find a new tribe. You must actively seek out people who measure a human being by an entirely different metric. You need to find the people who value a person for their curiosity, their kindness, their capacity to listen, and their ability to wonder. When you sit in a room full of people who genuinely do not care what your job title is, the toxic, suffocating anxiety of status simply evaporates into thin air. You realize that you were never actually poor or inadequate. You were just standing in the wrong room, being judged by the wrong jury. This is the ultimate soaring freedom of the human experience. The world will always have a ladder. There will always be a frantic, pushing crowd clawing their way to the top, terrified of being left behind, willing to trade their peace of mind for a sliver of public admiration. Let them run. You do not have to join them. You do not have to exhaust yourself trying to prove your worth to a system that will replace you the moment you stumble and forget you the moment you are gone. You have been granted a single, brief, impossibly beautiful life. It is far too precious and far too short to be spent as an anxious, trembling character in someone else's play. You do not need the world's permission to be happy. You do not need a prestigious title to have profound dignity. You already possess everything you need to justify your own existence. All that remains is to claim it. You just need the courage to define your own values. Cherish the quiet moments. Love the people in your life fiercely. Cultivate your own mind and walk away with your head held high from any system that asks you to trade your irreplaceable soul for a fleeting round of applause.